When you open up ArchiCAD, there's two main settings. So if we were to go File, New, or if we go File, Open, we get a dialog box. This will allow us to open up existing things. And if we were to press File, New, it would come up with New project. What do we want to do? Do we want to use a template? And if so, which template do we want to use? And then this other box down here says work environment profile. So which work environment profile do we want to use? So there's a whole lot of standardized profiles, and of course I've created some of my own as well. So when we're talking about a new file, and sometimes even an existing file, what we're talking about is the template, what's existing in the drawing or existing in the setup, and the work environment, which is the way that we interact with the screen. So the work environment includes things like the positioning and the inclusion of toolbars and palettes. So that's all the things we see around the sides of the screen, and the colors and the way that the dimension text is done and all that sort of thing. The template includes what information is already built into the software. So for instance, what story settings we might have, if we have sections or elevations, if we have worksheets or details or schedules. It'll also include if we have view maps. So I call these the saved views. So we've got in our navigator here on the right hand side, we have our project map. Then we have our view map, our layout book, and then our publisher. And to put this in a simple sort of a way, our project map is where we first start drawing information. And that's 3D information when we're putting it in stories, or 2D information when we're placing it in worksheets or details. But of course, we can also view that 3D information in multiple different orientations. So we can view it from a plan view, so that's the stories. We can view it in sections, we can view it in elevations, or we can view it in 3D. And that's what BIM is about, our building information modeling, where we build our 3D model and then we view it in two-dimensional views. Now, once we've created some of that drawing, we then want to interact with that drawing with some intelligence or with some saved views. So if I was to create a saved view, I can click down here, save current view, or I can click in a folder where I want to create a view, save current view, and then we see that it's going to allow me to name that view. It's also going to give me that intelligence that I was talking about before, and so that will allow us to save a layer combination, a scale, all these other things, structural display, pen sets, model view options, graphic overrides, renovation filter, and then things like dimensioning and zooming as well. And so that's all really useful. Now, when we get into 3D views, we see there's this one called 3D only. That's not relevant when we're talking about a two-dimensional view. And at the moment, we're talking about saving a floor plan. So what we need to understand is that in order to save a view, we first need to create the view. So we create it in the project map, and then we save a snapshot, but that snapshot is updatable. So that snapshot has the intelligence, has the saved view information, has the layer combination, the scale, the orientation on the page or the position on the page, and so on. From that, we then take our saved views and we place them onto our layouts. Just to explain this, how layouts work, we have a master layout, and our master layout defines what we see on our layout. So generally speaking, we will place a title block on our master layout, and that's one of the first things that we'll be doing if you haven't done that before, because it's very useful and very simple for understanding how two-dimensional tools work in ArchiCAD. And we recognize the master layout because it's grey. And simply put, whatever we draw on our master layout will be visible on our layouts. But we can't interact with it on our layouts. We can only interact with it on our master layout. Vice versa, if we draw something on a layout, we can see all of it on the layout, but if I switch between layouts, it may not be visible, it won't be visible, and we won't see it on our master layout either. So we need to understand what goes on our master layout and what doesn't, what just goes on our individual layouts. Generally speaking, a rule for that is that we will only ever drag a saved view onto a layout, not a master layout. The only things that we'll be putting on our master layouts will be things like title blocks. All right, so that's just a basic premise of how the setup works. We're going to jump straight into the modeling, and what we're modeling today is the Thurl site. If your drawing is very complicated, if you haven't yet started, what I would often recommend to students doing when they're very first time to ArchiCAD, or maybe they've tried ArchiCAD but they found it very hard to engage with, would be to go File, New, and then hold down Alt in order to press New and reset all. Why would I do that? That will get rid of a lot of the template information and a lot of the workspace information. But if your file is messy and you're finding it very hard to interact with the saved views, view map, and the layout book because it's so overcomplicated and overcrowded, by pressing New and reset all, that will get rid of that. If, however, you've already built stuff in ArchiCAD, it's probably not a good idea. It just means you either have to deal with the mess or copy paste that information into a new file where you have pressed New and reset all.
So we can
do it that way as well. So don't do it just yet. Let me come around and assist you with it, just so you don't accidentally lose all of your information. But that's in effect what we're trying to create. We're trying to create a page that's a little bit cleaner, a little bit more easy to work with, something that's going to make our life in ArchiCAD fun, not crazy complicated. All right, I'll have a few extra things on my screen than what you have, and that's just because I'm going to use those as reference to teach you, but I don't have much else there that you don't have that's going to make demonstrating this hard. We're going to jump straight into trying to model the site, and so we will do that just like we did the other day in 2D, but this time we're going to do it on the computer. And we're going to try to, as much as possible, avoid using two-dimensional commands and then repeating them in 3D. So in some cases we'll do that, and I'll explain why and when, but as much as we can, we want to try to reduce the amount of work that we need to do. Now, one of the things we need to do, on the right-hand side, you've probably got an area that says stories, and you've probably only got one story. What I want you to do is to go across to your navigator, into your project map, expand stories if it's not expanded, and it should probably just say 0 story. Yeah. I want you to right click on the one that's called 0 story and go down to where it says story settings. Now I want you to edit these so that we have consistent names. I want you to call the bottom one terrain.
just one.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. If you don't have any others, which is expected, then what I want you to do is to press insert above, insert above, insert above. I'll just do that now. I'll delete all my others so it just looks the same as yours. So we're going to have one that's called terrain. And then we're going to press insert above. We can do one at a time, or we can just press insert above a few times. That one will be called lower ground floor.
And the first one, number. And the first one, what?
So the bottom one is called terrain. Upper ground floor will be the one above that. We're not worrying about any of the numbers at the moment. We're just naming them, and then I'll explain what we're doing with the numbers after that. Insert above again. Now, it's a possibility for this project that you might be adding a first floor. Has anyone thought about adding a first floor for this project?
I thought about it, but not realistically. Yeah.
Well, Lex, for now, just draw it as a roof, because currently, in terms of the existing building, we'll just add a roof, and then we can always add in another story later. Now, we can see these stories 0, 1, 2, 3, and it was important that we pressed insert above instead of insert below, because what we didn't want is minus stories. We didn't want negative numbers. Now we want to change the heights of these, but it's very common that when we first start a project, we don't know what those numbers are. We don't know what they're meant to be. What we're going to do to make this a little bit simple, for now, elevation of the terrain is 0, and then we're going to only change the numbers in the height to next. So we're going to say that from terrain to lower ground floor is going to be 7500. Then we're going to make lower ground to upper ground be 2500. Upper ground, I didn't spell that well. Upper ground floor to roof will be 3 meters. And then it really doesn't matter what we make roof, but we'll make that 3 meters as well.
So the ground floor was the same?
So have a look at the screen. So we're only changing the height to next, but that's 7500, and then the next one is 2500, 3000, and 3000. Again, we're only adding numbers into the height to next, and we're starting at the bottom and working our way up. It's very important that we do this in a systematic way, because if we don't do it in a systematic way, we'll tend to keep overriding the work that we've already done. For instance, if we started to edit the elevation height, it would tend to muck around with the other heights. So it's very important that we do that in an orderly fashion. Once we've got all that done, we must press OK, otherwise we'll lose that information that we've just created. It's very common if you, in that process, deleted stories, it's going to say, are you sure you want to do this? Because if you delete a story, you also delete everything on that story. And of course, if you're doing this later in a process, then that can be very, very dangerous. There's some things that you can do in ArchiCAD that are undoable. Once you have done it, you can't undo it. And so we need to be very, very careful, and thankfully ArchiCAD does warn us about some of those things. All right. Now we're going to start building our mesh. We want to build our mesh on the story called terrain, and so we could actually call this a terrain mesh. ArchiCAD just calls it a mesh tool, but we can sort of see, if we look, maybe if we squint, maybe it looks a little bit like a contour mesh. Now, each time I show you a tool, I'll go into the tool and just explain it a little bit, just so I can give you a bit of context of what we're talking about. All right. When we go to the mesh tool, whenever we select anything, any tool in this box on the left, which is called our toolbox, just watch, please. Whenever we select any tool on the left-hand side, so this is called our tool, this is called our toolbox. The two top tools are our arrow and our marquee tool, and these are our selection tools. Then we have our design tools, and the design tools are our main 3D tools. Then we have document, which is our main 2D tools. And then we have more, which is a few extra 3D tools and extra 2D tools, and they're under more because maybe we don't use them very much. We're going to use the mesh tool. Once we select the mesh tool or any tool, this box here is called our info box. The info box will fill with the information about the tool that we've selected. And so we can interact with this. It's not just for looking at, we can actually choose and edit and change, and I can scroll when I'm on my info box, and that will actually scroll across so I can see most of the things in my dialog box, settings dialog box. So now if we click on the mesh itself, we see that it says settings dialog, and so that will take me into the mesh default settings. This is everything that I need to know about my mesh. So again, I'm going to take this nice and slow. When we're drawing mesh, we have 3 different methods of doing that. This used to be called Super Fleas. I'm glad it's changed because that was a really weird name. Now it's called Top Surface Only. Now it's called With Skirt and Solid Body. I don't use the skirt method ever. I generally will use the solid body 99% of the time, and then on a very small occasion I will use this top surface only. There used to be a tool that was quite commonly used called Mesh to Roof tool, which you could draw one of these mesh, the Super Fleas or the top surface only, and that's 0 millimeters thick, and so it had no thickness. And when we change it to Mesh to Roof tool, it would give it a thickness of anything we wanted, a thickness of 300 millimeters or whatever. So we could turn a mesh into a roof, and so that was really cool, that really useful. So if we wanted to create an organic roof shape, of course it would tessellate, it would turn it into triangles, but it would be able to be created from something very complicated, something that mostly ArchiCAD would otherwise not be able to do. ArchiCAD has historically been very bad at organic design. They're starting to get better at it by the inclusion of some of the recent tools, but it's always been something that we've needed to work hard at in order to create. So we had that ability to create Mesh to Roof tool. That still exists as an add-on, but it's not something that we use very much anymore because of some of the newer tools that have replaced that. The other time that I use this top surface is sometimes for a council requirement. I need to be able to show the height plane of a building. And generally speaking, we need to stay under that height plane, and that's just a rule that we need to stick to. But sometimes, on a very complicated site, it's very hard to know if we're doing that, not in one place, but in every situation. We might have a site that falls in 2 different orientations. And therefore, it's very tricky to understand just by a 2-dimensional section, because that's only cutting through one instance. It's hard to know if we've breach that height plane limit in any situation. So what we can do is we can create a copy of a solid as a top surface only of a mesh to be able to completely accurately represent the contour of the site, and then we can elevate it, whatever that height requirement is, 8.5 meters, 9 meters, whatever our council mandated height limit is, to be able to see not just in 2D, but even in 3D, where we're breaching that. And so sometimes I've needed to create a document like that to submit to council as well. And that's been very, very useful to be able to understand how the design works. So we'll get to that later. But the first one we're going to look at the moment is the solid body. And the solid body is the most useful because it allows us to cut into the earth. It also allows us to quantify the amount of earth, the amount of dirt. So if we're doing cut and fills or other things like that, we can determine how much we're cutting away, how much we're adding to. Great. So we're using this method. The next box down gives us our building material type. The building material type that we want to use is called earth, and that's built into ArchiCAD, so that's great. The fill representation's not brilliant, but it'll do for now. And we're going to allow there to be a base, a thickened edge base on the bottom of our mesh, and we'll leave that as 1000. And that just makes it easy to grab the corners or grab the edges, otherwise that can make it rather tricky. As we scroll down, we then have a lot of settings, and at the moment these are our floor plan and section settings, and this determines what we see. Now what I'm going to suggest that you do is to make some small changes to these in order to be able to represent it nicely and simply. So in the floor plan display, we're going to change this method to home story only. And then as we go down, we're going to change each of these pens to pen 1 to begin with. Now as you see, I choose a pen, it brings up my entire pen set, and we see this pen set is very colorful. And personally, I'm not a big fan of this pen set, so one of the things we're going to do later today is to adjust this pen set. But for now, we're going to change all those to 1, except for the one that's in cover fill. And we want this cover fill to say 25%. If it's not already turned on, we need to click the button to turn it on. 25%. I'm going to use this one that's called pen 4 for now. I'll change it later. And then the one underneath is 0. 0 is very down the bottom, and it says transparent. Now this allows me when I draw I'll draw it really quickly, when I draw a mesh, it makes it green. So that means I can see what I've done. Otherwise, it can be very difficult to identify what I've done. So I'm going to go back into these settings, and I will leave this up on the screen, and I want you to duplicate my settings, please.